Hi guys, Steve Dempster here, Dempster Guitar Studio, and I want to welcome you to this ongoing series on basically helping guitarists kind of change their operating system, how they think about this thing, the fretboard. And so basically the series came out of lots of questions that I get from students about how this works or how that works, or what's the relationship between a scale and making music, or a scale and a chord, or is there a relationship? Because in my experience, I'm finding that a lot of contemporary players, young players trying to get a handle on the instrument, are learning it in little packages of information. There really isn't kind of a consistent flow to the information that's coming out. And so all this stuff that they're learning kind of always feels disconnected. This little bit, this little bit, this little bit, this little bit. Nothing seems to be fluid. And of course my brain is going, well, this doesn't have to be that way. It's that way because of the environment today where people just want information to play something really cool, really quick. But like any skill, like any craft, there is a foundation that will enable you, once you get it, to understand everything else in music that you need to understand so you feel like a very fulfilled player. So from that observation, I had decided to create, I'll just pull it up here, this is a black and white version, but I created this PDF series. I hope you can see that there. And it's entitled Where Stuff Comes From. And it's done in a bit of a whimsical way, lots of funny sort of graphics, and not taking itself too seriously, but at the same time encouraging guitarists to spend some time on this stuff, because quite frankly, the stuff that's in here is the stuff that tends to get glossed over. So what I'm attempting to do is, through the PDF, get you thinking about this stuff. There's actually a series of them right now. I'm up to 4, and it will go on as long as I feel it needs to. And each one basically captures an idea, one idea worth thinking about, and kind of drilling it into your mind. But what it is not about is where to put your fingers, what's the coolest lick to play, or how do you play that song. It is about how music works. And once you get that information up here, and ultimately in here, then, quite frankly, you don't even need me anymore. You could just go out and engage in the musical conversation that allows you to make sense of everything that comes up. So that's the point of the series. The PDFs got it started, and now I'm putting together some video material to complement the PDF. So in this video, we are going to tackle the first issue that I wrote about, which is simply called, now this is not earth-shattering, but it's simply called building the major scale. Guitarists don't like to hear things like building the major scale, mostly because, as you know, guitarists are introduced to the minor pentatonic scale often first before anything else, because that, in its defense, that's the sound that we're used to hearing when we hear solos or certain melodies played out in contemporary genres. We're used to hearing that sound. But building the major scale, man, Stephen, that can't be more boring. It's only boring because you're making it boring. So I want to walk through the PDF and make sure that all the concepts are clear. So keep the idea, the big idea in mind. The purpose of the first issue is to build the major scale, and basically to understand it not from the point of view of strings and frets. In fact, I'll go as far to say you should stop just thinking about the fretboard as strings and frets and shapes, but for that matter. These are sounds, and those sounds do have names. And the structure of how we talk about other structures in music come from understanding those names. Hit a clam there, a flubby note. If we know the names and we understand how they relate to one another, that's the stuff that allows you to make connections to other concepts much more easily, and we'll be digging into that in subsequent videos. Okay, so I open up in the PDF with the idea that I wanted students to understand that music as a language is just built out of 7 letters. And if you compare that to your written alphabet, 26 letters, you're not dealing with a lot of information. If you ask many players to play a series of sounds on the guitar and then go ahead and name those sounds, a lot of them are at a loss because they're just not used to thinking this way about the fretboard. So we started off, or I started off, by getting you to think about the 7 letters that we use in music, and they're just the first 7 letters of our alphabet. It makes sense to use that because we already had it in place. We could have called these sounds anything else. There's nothing magical about naming them with alphabet letters. But it was already in place. We should just take advantage of it. It's as simple as that. You don't need to think any further on it. And there's only 7. And it's just A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Done. There are no other letter names. There are manipulations of those letters, again, which we'll talk about later. But there are only 7 letters that we work with. And I'm trying to make the point very quickly in the first issue, the first PDF, that at least on one string, you should understand where those letter names are located and ultimately the way they lay themselves out on one string. I think it's very important to see how sounds lay out. Sounds, in this case, referring to some scale structures, lay out on one string instead of the more traditional patterns that we're used to doing across strings. So I did this on the 5th string, which of course, for all at least aware of our open string names, you'll know that that's an A. So we're on our way. A to B, that's the next letter we're dealing with. A, just behind the nut there of the guitar, if you can see it, to B is 2 frets away. It's not just that there's this sound there in the 2nd fret. Excuse me. It's that there is the sound that's called B in the 2nd fret. And it's 2 frets up from the open string A. I hope that makes sense. So A to B, 2 frets. B to C is always 1 fret away. They're always side by side. Anywhere on the fretboard, this is true, but we're just sticking to the one string, B and C. But bear in mind as we go through these notes, the game here is to engage your mind to continually recall the names as you play, as you move around those notes. Not just to see it as a layout of pattern, although you will, but additionally to see it as a layout of things that have names. Just like you have a name, I have a name, this thing has a name. We have names for things. I don't understand completely why guitarists really go out of their way to just ignore the names of the notes that are under their fingers all the time. You're probably sensing a bit of my bias and my passion here, but it is what it is, and I'm sticking with it. So we have A, B at the 2nd fret, C at the 3rd, B and C side by side. C to D, D is always 2 frets away from C. Everywhere on the fretboard. Keep that in mind. E to F, sorry, D to E, always 2 frets apart on the same string. E to F, 1 fret. Just like B and C, E and F, 1 fret. F to G is 2. And finally, G to A. After G, we start the whole thing again. So G to A is 2. And then that brings us up to this unique spot on the fretboard that a lot of players haven't even thought about this idea. Why are there often 2 dots located there, or at least some other indicator that's different than the other dots? Why is that so important? Well, the distance from the original starting A note up to this A note is a musical distance. We call that an interval. From A, a low A, to a high A, you could do it that way if you want, low A to high A. That distance with all the other letters in between, there is not another A along this string until I get to the 12th fret. And that name for that distance or that interval is referred to as an octave. You've probably heard that before. But have you given it much thought as to, yeah, every note that's at the 12th fret is just being reproduced from the notes that were on the open strings? That might take a bit of time, but it will become clear. So that was step one, to get that underway and to help you understand intervallically the distances between these notes, not only like A to A being an octave, very, very common interval, but each of these distances between the other notes are also intervals and they have names. So anytime I move 2 frets, we're often going to refer to it as a tone. Some refer to it as a whole tone or a full tone. We're just going to call it a tone. And for now, your mind will say, okay, a tone is 2 frets apart. Whatever note you're on, a tone higher would be 2 frets higher. A tone lower would be 2 frets lower. That's all you have to think about. So those are the notes that have a space in between them, basically. And then the other 2 are the B and C and E and F. If you recall, they're just 1 fret apart, and we refer to those as semitones. And so there's an order here that lays out as we play out through the notes of our musical alphabet. And it goes from the open A string to the 2nd fret B note. That distance, 2 frets, is a tone. So you hold that in your memory or you write it down, whatever you need to do to keep it in your mind. A to B is always a tone, 2 frets along 1 string. So tone up to the B note is a tone. Up to the C note from B is a semitone. So tone, semitone. C to D is a tone. D to E is a tone. E to F is a semitone. F to G is a tone. And then finally G to A is a tone. And then from that point on, the whole thing just continues until you've run out of frets on your fretboard. Now, the point right now with that is to get you to remember, to memorize. There'll be a lot of memorizing going on. The names of the notes that are located on those frets. So you can certainly see it as a visual pattern that you can remember, you know, 2 frets and then 1, and then 2, and then 2, and then 1, and then 2, and then 2. Do that. Then do it as letter names. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. Sometimes when I introduce that concept, some students sitting right opposite me here will say, well, wait a second, Steve. If you can do that on the 5th string, and all these distances between the notes never change if they're just the notes themselves, the natural notes I call them, then I can do that on any string as long as I have an A to start on. And you're absolutely right. If you think about that for a second, just with that one concept alone, if you knew where other A's were on each string, you are already in a position, just like that, to understand what all the other notes are on your fretboard, all the natural notes. It doesn't mean it happens quick. It doesn't mean immediately you're going to be able to do it, but the concept is in place and it's got the wheels turning, and it will ultimately enable you to understand, again, what's going on under your fingers. So that's that. Now, I didn't want you to memorize this tone, semitone, tone, tone, semitone, tone, tone, yet. It comes in handy later on, but what I wanted to do is using that idea, start the same process, but instead of starting on A, which helped you to learn what the notes were on that string, the natural notes, I wanted you to start on a C note. Now, if you're paying attention on that 5th string, you'd go, okay, well, where's C? Well, there's A, B, 2 frets up, C. Now, here's the cool thing. If I play from C and still maintain that interval structure that I learned from the A note, in other words, C to D I always know is 2 frets, D to E I always know is 2 frets, E to F is 1, F to G is 2, G to A is 2, this is going up high on the acoustic, A to B is 2, and B to C is 1. I'm just rewriting the same structure starting on another note, in this case C. If I do that, here's the sound that I get, and this is the point of this particular PDF. It's to create this sound and for you to remember, memorize the sound and memorize what will be called the interval formula for the whole thing, this major scale sound. So if I start on C and I remember my intervals, I get C to D, oh yeah, 2 frets. D to E, 2 frets. E to F, 1 fret. F to G, 2 frets. G to A, 2 frets. A to B, 2 frets. B to C, 1 fret. Again, I started on a C down at the 3rd fret, and the game here is to end on another C way up here. This is at 12, 13, 14, 15. What's the name of that interval again? From one note to the same note, an octave higher? That's another C, and that distance is an octave. It's an important concept in music to be aware of and to learn over time how it plays itself out on your fretboard. But here's the sound of it when I stop talking and I just play it. Take a listen. And then coming backwards, it's always a good thing to do. You can't tell me that that's not a familiar sound. Most young children who have gone through a music program in school will tell you, oh yeah, it's the sound of, you know, a major scale. They know that sound. They often refer to it as the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That sound, right? You got to get that sound into your mind, and you got to get the interval structure, the distances between those notes, memorized. In this case, a tone, a semitone, a tone, a tone, a tone, a semitone. And it's got to get to the point where you can just go, oh yeah, the major scale. Tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. If you think of it in terms of frets, you could say 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. Hey, it's very close to my cell phone number. Don't call me on the cell phone. Very close to my cell phone. 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. And that's what you are playing. 2 frets, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. So the main thing here right now is to get that major scale sound into your mind so that you can't not recognize it when you hear it. Critical. Secondly, to memorize what's referred to as the interval formula for this particular major scale. Because it starts and ends on C, we call it the C major scale, and it's the only major scale in our music system that when we play through all the notes to create that specific sound, all the notes happen to be natural. In other words, no sharps or flats. If you're not clear on what those terms mean, that comes a bit later. Okay, that's pretty much the point of the first issue. Go and digest that for a little bit. Don't just do this, however. Sorry. Oh, that's boring. boring, 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 boring. I get it. Do something with it that's musical. If you've never tried this before, it can be a bit intimidating, but it's important with every concept you learn to transition from technically knowing how it operates to musically knowing how it operates. So, if I were you, I'd be doing things like this, and I do this all the time, every day. It's just a normal thing. I can visualize where those notes are on my fretboard. I understand their distances, their intervals. I understand their note names. I'm going to play it for myself slow enough that as I play, I can mentally, rather quickly, name the notes. Otherwise, I'm missing the point of the exercise right now. Eventually, yes, of course, in the midst of real playing, you're often moving so fast, you're not recalling specific notes, but by then you have entrained the nervous system to understand what it is you're doing, and if you had to recall the names, it's not a problem, but it does have to be rehearsed. So here's me taking that concept and by the way, just because I started here with the actual scale, can't I go backwards too? If that's a C, isn't B just 1 fret below, which you know? Isn't A 2 frets down? So I can include those in my music making. I don't have to just stay stuck right there. But I would, at first, do that, and then when you feel comfortable, venture a bit beyond it. Here I go, making some music. 3, 4. That kind of thing. Bring in your rhythmic awareness to the playing of something as you work your way around these tones to get familiar with where they're located, intervallically speaking, 2 frets or 1 fret apart, all that sort of stuff, and naming them mentally in your mind. Because once you know the names of the things that are under your fingers, how chords are made is going to make a lot more sense. How arpeggios are made is going to make a lot more sense. How chord progressions work in a key is going to make a lot more sense. What it means to play in a key is going to make a lot more sense. How to navigate around the fretboard in a competent way instead of just relying on robotic patterns and licks that you've accumulated, which are still good. You use them, but they're not complete, is going to make a lot more sense. It goes on and on and on from the simple knowledge of knowing C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Okay, so I close out that particular PDF with just a few things to think about. I hit on it a few times with regards to, hey, if I can do this on one string, why can't I do it on all? Turns out there's a C here on the 2nd string, 1st fret. Same formula is going to play itself out from there. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Now there's a C here on the 1st string. I can go up until I run out of frets if I want to. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Or I could go backwards from there just to fill out that string. C, B, G, G, F, E. So the idea here is that you can extend out that concept, effectively covering the whole board. Now, if you're not jiggling in your seat, getting all excited about this already, you will, I hope, start to see the power of what you just did. It means that you now know, at least theoretically, where all the natural notes on your fretboard are. You do have to know your starting string names. You should by now anyway. And then work your way up from there. Let me give you a quick demonstration. 4th string is a D. According to that interval formulation that I talked about earlier, the next letter up in the alphabet, E, click, 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 2 frets away, D, E. E to F, 1. F to G, 2. G to A, 2. A to B, to B to C, and I could keep on going. C to D, D to E, E to F, F to G, G to A, and then A, and I go right off the fretboard. For all practical purposes, there's no note there. There's one above it, but it's not part of the natural letters that we're playing. You can do that on each and every string. I'm not asking you to memorize all of this. I'm asking you to understand the concept of it on one string and start to think about it being applied over all the strings. Why did we bother starting with the major scale in this series? Well, I alluded to that as well at the beginning. It's all about the fact that, in a sense, the major scale is kind of the kingpin of scales. Think of it as like the foundational material of building a house, the actual foundation. That knowing that scale, not just the C scale, the C major scale that we did, but any major scale, understanding that thing deeply will enable you to build upon it easily, effortlessly, and the connections that you're looking for will help you understand where all the other stuff is coming from. Big picture, once again, we're transitioning away from seeing the fretboard as just strings and frets. It's easy to fall prey to that because we're very visual on the fretboard, and I'm encouraging you to continue using that, but I am asking you to essentially replace it, though, as your main operating system with the operating system of the note names along the strings. This does not happen overnight. It's not quick. It takes time. You have to make it a habit as you play to take the time to recall the notes that you can. If you don't know a certain note, that's okay. You'll know it eventually. But there will be notes that you can name, and you get into the habit of mentally naming them as you're upon them. That's the idea here. Once we get that under control, then everything else starts to make a lot of sense. So that's the first issue. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope that made some sense and brought together information in the PDF for you. Steve Dempster, Dempster Guitar Studio. Till next time.